Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Example, and I'm here to do my day job in my time off. You know, as a media journalist, I spend a lot of time studying characters and stories from day to day. In this video, we'll see if we can put some of that effort to good use, because tonight we're going to be doing a spot of proper critical analysis. Our subject is Yotsuyu from the world of Final Fantasy XIV, Stormblood. There, you should be seeing her on your screen right now. Her visual design is strikingly good, as you can no doubt tell. Before we get too hung up on her looks, though, allow me to furnish you with a quick introduction, just in case you aren't already familiar with Eorzea and the world of Final Fantasy XIV. Allow me to briefly paint a picture for you. Yotsuyu is the acting viceroy of the Doman nation, which is occupied by the victorious Garlean military empire at the time our story begins. She's introduced to us right away as basically a stone-cold, heartless bitch, a killer with no remorse and some almost perverse sadistic tendencies. She seems to have something of a fetish for torturing and killing innocent Domans, relishing in their anguish even though she is, by birth, one of them. This intriguing setup is fleshed out in her grand introduction, which we can take a small look at right now. Filth and squalor everywhere I look, how very Doman. So we can see from this immediately that she's associated filth and squalor, all things vile, with being Doman, as if it's an inherent trait of the Doman people. And here we get to see, as she bullies the terrorized innocent Domans of this small fishing hamlet, a brief glimpse into her own personal philosophy. "'Tis better to bend with the wind than stand tall and be broken. Therein lies hope, and therein lies freedom." We don't know it yet, but those words will be positively overburdened with meaning a little later on. And finally, she hands this poor kid a gun and tells him to shoot his own parents on the spot, clearly under threat of death, of course, the threat of his death and the threat of the death of his own family. Pretty neat, right? From this and a few other early scenes, we can tell she's clearly got some hidden frustrations about the security of her position as acting viceroy. And even better, you can almost sense the faint traces of insecurity in her psyche. These are brought to light as the audience realizes that Yotsuyu is a Doman herself, and is therefore basically obsessively hunting down and torturing her own people. Fascinating, right? Pretty good as villain build-ups go. But unfortunately, these opening scenes were about the only thing Square Enix actually did right when it comes to her character arc. It's really important to understand that I chose her to be the first subject of our character analysis adventure, not because she was handled well, but because I was so disappointed in the execution of her narrative arc. You see, with a setup like that, there was so much room to make her a fabulous, memorable villain, and beyond that, a moving figure. But instead, Square Enix massively cheats on her potential by taking the easy way out. Most of the time we actually spend with Yotsuyu throughout the story is just one long, drawn-out plotting sequence of her bitching at her bumbling sidekick and sounding generically cruel. Why not show us her internal conflict instead? Get us intimately involved with her character, instead of just having her strut around for hours on end with her worthless bodyguard. A character so negligible and forgettable, he's basically a punchline in and of himself. If Square just let us spend some actual time getting engaged in her emotional conflicts, in her past, letting us associate with the progression of her arc, we could have really started to empathize with her. Come on, Square, this is obvious. Let us into her fear, into her vulnerability, so that it contrasts with the harsh bitterness of her villainous ways. Don't just have her say that she's basically a dick and leave it at that. She shouldn't just be a... Now, where does this lead us but to the crux of the issue? The biggest flaw in the execution of Yotsuyu's character isn't just that we never got to really see her own conflicts or her emotional state evolve, it's also that Square totally crippled the impact that our climactic confrontation with her should have had. Minor spoilers, of course, but basically, we get one measly flashback, which doesn't even really show us anything powerful or moving, and then we confront her almost immediately after. She rages pitifully against her own fate, helpless once cornered by our heroes, which is good. That is the right mindset for her to be in. It's consistent with her character. She should be utterly strung out. She should be wildly denying reality and trying to deflect the blame. But when it's finally time for her to spill her guts, to explain her warped perspective, and vent about how it's all just so unfair, Square Enix hits us with the most overt softball I've ever seen in my entire life. Yotsuyu hisses angrily about how she was sold off to a drunken husband, Young, who, quote-unquote, beat her. He beat her, quote-unquote. And that's the trauma, supposedly. Honestly, let me just show you how much Square Enix left on the table by basically rushing her story arc like this. It's easy to see what they should have done with Yotsuyu's character. Go balls deep, it's obvious. Say she was sold to a young, brash military man who didn't see her as a person because she was Domin, and who sexually abused her because she was Domin. Because Domin was worthless in his eyes, just like it's worthless in the eyes of the Empire. They all but confirm that she was sexually abused, so don't slow roll it out of existence, Square. They won't find a flower just waiting to be plucked. This is what she says here. You know their tricks. They will not find a flower simply waiting to be plucked. Could it be more overt? Come on. I mean, the quality of her dialogue and the writing is so good, but this is really important. If you specify that the abuse she suffered was sexual in nature, you've instantly given me a fresh reason to be invested in her character. It's so easy, so effective, and so efficient that it should be obvious. They hint at it pretty clearly, but why hint? Why are you sandbagging the payoff to her entire personal struggle thus far? It's so much stronger if they just confirm her abuse outright. See, the trick is that audiences have trouble fully blaming a villain if that villain is also an established victim of hideous sexual abuse. A psyche-warping trauma like that in her backstory, when she was young, it would basically fully illuminate all her heinous criminal actions, because we would know, at a very deep emotional level. And look, it just makes way more sense, too, because then we would be able to understand her innate distrust of Domans and her hatred of Doma. We would understand it way better. The abuse and mistreatment by her Garlean military husband, who treated her like shit because she was Doman, would have eventually sank in and caused her to become the villain she is today. She would have internalized that self-loathing and hatred. It would have caused us to feel so much more strongly for her, so much more deeply for her, because this is a real thing. This actually happens to legit rape survivors and long-term sex abuse victims. It would make her a real sympathetic, tragic figure whose fate wasn't of her own making. Her actions would still be unforgivable, yeah, of course, but we can't help but pity her and feel sorry for her. Sadly, the evil just because route is the route Square Enix ended up taking, because in the actual game, Yotsuyu basically just straight up says she hates Domans because reasons. She's a simple sadist in the version they went with, which I'm pretty sure qualifies as criminal neglect of character potential. Because it's so clear that there was a way stronger narrative arc for Yotsuyu than the one they actually went with. And if they had done it right, we could have gotten that same great introduction and build up to her character. But instead of just watching her be smarmy and bitchy for a few hours, we would have experienced her own perspective and gotten a taste of her fear, really understood her hate, and bore witness to some of the emotional conflicts and ongoing struggles with her tortured past. Then, finally, when the time came for that climactic confrontation, and she explains everything, we would have truly understood what caused her to morph into this heartless sadomasochist. Honestly, the fact that we just got a bitch instead of a brilliant Machiavellian villain, it's basically a travesty. And as much as I love Yotsuyu, I just can't help feeling like they did her wrong. Hopefully she'll stick around and be a part of the future of this game. Maybe Square Enix will come to their senses, who knows. I wouldn't count on it, though. Alright, that's all for now. For this episode of Character Analysis featuring Yotsuyu and Final Fantasy XIV. I do hope to see you again soon, though, and make sure to let me know if you have any ideas or want me to take a look at any other characters or stories. I will gladly take your requests. And the last thing you can do for me is have a good night.